young Yazidi woman was sold 7 times between ISIS fighters. Each owner subjected her to increasingly brutal torture, electric shocks to her chest, cigarette burns on her thighs, and systematic rape. When she attempted escape, they cut off her feet. This wasn't a random act of cruelty. This was ISIS's calculated system of terror. A methodology of torture designed not just to break individuals, but to shatter entire communities and cultures. While the world watched their propaganda videos of beheadings, a far more sinister campaign of psychological warfare and systematic torture was unfolding behind closed doors. Welcome to the infamous past, where we expose the darkest tactics used by ISIS to maintain control, manipulate minds, and spread fear across the territories they once controlled. If history's darkest chapters fascinate you, don't forget to subscribe. The beginning of ISIS. ISIS emerged from the chaos of post-invasion Iraq and the Syrian civil war, declaring a caliphate in 2014 that, at its peak, controlled territory roughly the size of Britain. Within this self-declared state, they implemented an extreme interpretation of Islamic law that justified unprecedented levels of violence against those they deemed enemies or apostates. What distinguished ISIS from other terrorist organizations was their territorial control, which allowed them to institutionalize their brutality. They didn't just commit acts of terror, they created systems of terror, complete with dedicated facilities, trained personnel, and bureaucratic procedures. According to documents recovered after their territorial defeat, ISIS maintained a network of detention facilities across Syria and Iraq, where torture was routine. These weren't hidden black sites. They were openly acknowledged punishment centers, where ISIS's interpretation of justice was carried out in full view of local populations. But once ISIS had territory, they didn't just rule with ideology. They created institutions, real, physical places, designed to break people. What happened inside those walls is almost beyond belief. Tortures by ISIS. ISIS's torture methods combined ancient punishments with modern psychological techniques, creating a system designed to maximize both physical pain and mental trauma. One of their signature methods was water torture, but with a cruel innovation. Prisoners would be forced to drink large quantities of water, then beaten in the stomach until they vomited. This would be repeated for hours, sometimes days. According to a survivor interviewed by Human Rights Watch, this method was designed to cleanse prisoners of their impure thoughts before interrogation. Another documented method involved stress positions. Prisoners would be suspended from ceilings by their wrists, which were handcuffed behind their backs, a position known as strappado that dates back to medieval times. This position causes excruciating shoulder pain and can lead to permanent nerve damage. One survivor from Raqqa described being kept in this position for 48 hours, during which time he lost consciousness repeatedly, only to be revived with cold water. Perhaps most disturbing was the metal chair, a device where prisoners were strapped into a chair with metal clamps that could be tightened around their limbs and chest. The chair would then be electrified. According to documents from the International Criminal Court, this method was reserved for those accused of espionage or collaboration with enemy forces. What made these methods particularly effective as tools of terror was their public nature. ISIS didn't hide their torture. They showcased it. Torture sessions were often conducted in front of other prisoners or even public audiences, multiplying the psychological impact beyond the immediate victim. And what they did in secret, they amplified in public, because fear spreads faster when everyone is watching. Strongest tool of influence. Beyond torture and detention facilities, ISIS implemented a system of public punishments designed to terrorize civilian populations into compliance. In Raqqa, which served as ISIS's de facto capital, public squares became theaters of horror. Every Friday after prayers, crowds would be gathered, often forcibly, to witness punishments. These included amputations for theft, floggings for moral infractions, and beheadings for more serious offenses. According to a 2017 United Nations report, these public spectacles served multiple purposes. They demonstrated ISIS's power, reinforced their interpretation of Islamic law, and created a climate of fear that discouraged resistance. Children were often placed in front rows to witness these punishments, part of ISIS's strategy to normalize violence for the next generation. One particularly chilling account comes from a former resident of Mosul, who described how ISIS would display severed heads on spikes in public parks where children played. They wanted death to become as normal as breathing, he told investigators from the UN Human Rights Council. But perhaps the most psychologically devastating aspect of these public punishments was the forced participation of community members. Fathers would be ordered to watch the execution of their sons. Family members would be forced to stone their own relatives. This forced complicity was designed to break community bonds and replace them with collective trauma. But perhaps their most horrific system was one they proudly advertised, a marketplace of human lives, backed by religious justifications, where little girls were given price tags. Sexual slavery. Among ISIS's most systematic atrocities was their institutionalization of sexual slavery, particularly targeting Yazidi women and girls. This wasn't hidden or denied. It was proudly proclaimed in their own publications as the revival of an ancient practice. In August 2014, ISIS fighters captured thousands of Yazidis in the Sinjar region of Iraq. According to the United Nations, approximately 7,000 women and girls were enslaved and sold in markets. ISIS published price lists for females of different ages, with girls between 1 to 9 years old commanding the highest prices. The sexual slavery system was bureaucratically organized. ISIS created a Department of War Spoils that managed the distribution of captives. They issued religious rulings justifying the practice and established detailed regulations governing how slaves could be treated, bought, and sold. Survivors who escaped described being held in a series of distribution centers where they were examined, photographed, and assigned numbers before being sold to fighters. Many were sold multiple times, with each owner subjecting them to new forms of abuse. What made this system particularly devastating was its deliberate attack on Yazidi cultural identity. By systematically raping Yazidi women, ISIS fighters believed they were converting them to Islam, part of a calculated genocide against a religious minority that had survived for centuries in the region. The psychological warfare. Beyond physical torture and sexual violence, ISIS pioneered sophisticated psychological warfare techniques that targeted both individuals and entire societies. Their media operation produced high-quality propaganda videos that served multiple purposes. Execution videos weren't just displays of brutality. They were carefully choreographed productions designed to instill specific psychological reactions. The orange jumpsuits worn by victims referenced Guantanamo Bay, creating a narrative of revenge. The calm, methodical nature of the killings projected an image of inevitable power. ISIS also weaponized social media in unprecedented ways. They maintained thousands of accounts across platforms, flooding the internet with their content. According to analysis by the Rand Corporation, this digital blitzkrieg was designed to create a sense of ISIS's omnipresence and inevitability. Perhaps most disturbing was ISIS's systematic indoctrination of children. In territories they controlled, they replaced school curricula with their own educational materials that normalized violence. Children as young as 4 were forced to watch executions. Boys as young as 6 were placed in training camps where they were taught to kill. According to UNICEF, these cubs of the caliphate represent one of ISIS's most enduring legacies. A generation traumatized and in some cases, radicalized. The psychological impact of ISIS's rule continues long after their territorial defeat. Entire communities suffer from collective trauma. Former ISIS territories have some of the highest rates of PTSD ever recorded in conflict zones. As one mental health worker in Iraq told researchers, they may have lost their caliphate, but they planted their ideology in thousands of minds. Extremism. The end? The systematic torture, public punishments, sexual slavery, and psychological warfare employed by ISIS represent one of the darkest chapters in recent human history. Their methods weren't just brutal, they were calculated to maximize suffering and minimize resistance. Understanding these tactics isn't about sensationalizing horror. It's about recognizing the warning signs of extremism before it reaches such devastating heights. It's about acknowledging the survivors whose testimony makes this understanding possible. And it's about ensuring that the international community develops better responses to prevent such atrocities in the future. The physical caliphate has fallen, but the ideology that justified these horrors remains. In refugee camps across Syria and Iraq, survivors still struggle with the psychological aftermath of ISIS rule. Their stories demand not just our attention, but our commitment to preventing history from repeating itself. Can understanding the psychology behind systematic torture help us prevent future atrocities? Or are some ideologies simply beyond reasoning? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this exploration valuable, hit the like button and subscribe for more examinations of history's darkest chapters and what they teach us about human nature.